Well, massive open online courses, or online open courses, whichever way you want to do it. I think probably everybody in this audience, just taking a quick glance at here, will be aware of the explosion that has happened, that we now literally have hundreds of courses all around the world. They come in the first place from the elite universities in America. I'm going to look briefly at Coursera and our own Open University offering, which is FutureLearn. Just to give you an idea, I just did a quick look. Recently, Coursera now has 609 global partners, all offering a great variety of stuff, give you a flavour, critical perspectives on management, organisational analysis, the history and future of mostly higher education. I'll give you a flavour of FutureLearn, which has 29 partners, 26 of which are British universities, and not all British. We've got their corpus linguistics, the world is flat, decision making, there's one on Richard III, etc., etc. We've got a vast variety of subjects, and I guess I have to make a confession, which may not go down so well with one or two members on this particular panel, that I'm really a follower of MOOCs. In other words, I'm using them as an experienced learner in order to acquire a broad knowledge. I sign up for MOOCs quite regularly. I'm not interested in necessarily completing them at all. I'm interested in looking at what's happening with them, the way that they're developing. I don't agree with Dennis when he says it's got to be in a physical campus. I think that is actually not the case. It's not my experience. And what is important is, to maybe Dennis will like to pick this up later on, is indeed the relationship between the tutor and the individual students. And I can quite categorically say, having been in FE and doing a lot of HE courses with universities, that that relationship is very, very strong in terms of feedback. The technology, again, I think, is a distractor in the sense, yes, there'll be lots of things that go right and go wrong with the technology. I'm more of a technophobe than I am actually somebody in favour of technology. It's simply there and you've got to use it. And I would say that the point in terms of looking at that in physical campus is that you can have a much stronger relationship.
I'm Claire Beecroft. As Shirley said at the beginning, I'm an information specialist and a university teacher at the School of Health and Related Research, SHAR, at Sheffield University. At University of Sheffield, at SHAR, we've run 3 MOOCs now, and we ran them on a platform called Course Sites, which some of you may have heard of. Within SHAR, we do a lot of online distance learning courses, master's level courses already. So we were already doing online learning, so doing MOOCs didn't seem like too much of a shift really. It was just a natural kind of extension of what we'd already been doing. The reason why we decided to do some MOOCs is, well, I think as we've already kind of touched on, MOOCs can be a lot of different things, and the motivations behind them can be many and varied. We've done 3 MOOCs so far, one of which, the one that I was most involved in, one on health technology assessment, was very directly related to an MSc programme that we ran, and part of our reasoning for doing it was to promote that master's programme and give people a chance to have a little taster of some of the content from 3 of the modules, all stitched together so it made sense and held together as one entry-level health technology assessment online course, but that was a big part of our motivation. But we've done other ones that stood more as perhaps a showcase, as you said earlier, for the department, for the research that goes on within SHAR. So we've had sort of a few different kind of motivations to do our MOOCs. Generally speaking, I quite like MOOCs, unsurprisingly, being from a department that's delivered 3 of them. And it's a little bit disappointing at times to read the tidal wave, it seems, of negativity and stuff that's written about them, a lot of fear around MOOCs and what they're going to do to higher education. I think at SHAR we see our MOOCs as just being another string to our bow, another part of what we do, not really replacing anything, more additional kinds of activities. we so far don't really know what the benefits to us as a department of doing the MOOCs are going to be. The last one only finished in December last year, so it's kind of quite recent to be measuring the impact of our MOOCs. We know we've got a few more students signed up to our online courses. That's the benefit of having delivered the MOOCs. But things like the reputational benefit are quite hard for us to measure, and we're kind of working at the moment on working out how can we work out what the impacts of our MOOCs have been beyond bums on seats on our master's programme, because that's not the only reason for us doing them. What I think is good about our MOOCs is that, first of all, as with all kinds of online learning, it does allow a lot of flexibility, and it allows people who otherwise couldn't attend a face-to-face course to fit in learning around all the other things that are going on in their lives. We're a postgraduate department, we don't have any undergraduate programmes, so we're not appealing to 18-year-old school leavers. We're mostly appealing to people who are already working, already in professional practice, or trying to add in some learning, as well as often having a full-time job, trying to fit in something like a master's programme. So for us, the MOOCs give our students the chance to feel what it's like to be an online learner, which might help them to make the right decision about whether investing thousands of pounds in an online master's programme would be the right idea for them. It gives them a sense of the nature of our courses and the content of them. We are flexible sometimes in our admissions requirements for our master's programmes, and I think the MOOCs have helped some people to make that decision about whether they could handle postgraduate level study if they don't have a first degree, because we will take people onto our courses without any previous experience of higher education if they can demonstrate to us that through professional experience and so on they can handle that level. But the MOOCs give them a chance to find that out for themselves, if you see what I mean. And for free, there's no risk really or any cost in doing our MOOCs and making that discovery for yourself about can you handle sort of postgraduate level study. I think they've also helped some people to make decisions about making a career change, again, with minimal sort of cost or impact on them if it doesn't work out. I also think they've offered a lot more insight for students than an open day ever could. We've always run open days at university, like most universities do, but international students can't really attend them, and open days tend to go down the route of promoting the university as a whole and the kind of experience and the city and so on and so forth, whereas doing a MOOC tells you what's it like to be a learner, what's it like to do this course. Overall at the university, we are now going down the future learning path. We're going to be running the School of Dentistry at Charles, going to be running a MOOC in March, and their MOOC is very much orientated around introducing dentistry as a career, and I think that's another really brilliant reason for running a MOOC. If you think about the average student applying to particularly dentistry and medicine, they're incredibly vocational as degrees go. You know, if you do one of those two courses, you're probably thinking that I'm going to become a dentist or a doctor. That's a massive decision to make when you're 17 or 18 years old. You know, it's a huge decision, and pulling out of a course like that is a massive, big life impacting decision. So that MOOC hopefully is going to give students an opportunity to have a chance to really think more in depth and have a bit more experience of, is this really going to be the right career choice for me? So another positive reason for doing MOOCs. I think a lot of the criticism about MOOCs does come from the fact that they are intrinsically associated with sort of learning technology, and not everybody's hugely keen on delivering courses online. I think we're very lucky in showing that we have 2 full-time learning technologists, and we're kind of trying to get another one at the moment as well. And having learning technologists work on our MOOCs with us has been completely and utterly essential, because learning technologists, the clue is in the name. They understand about learning and about technology, and putting those 2 things together and having them work with us on our MOOCs has been incredibly important in enabling us to really think hard about the design of our MOOCs and, you know, thinking from the perspective of what's pedagogically the right kind of technology to use, given that we're trying to reach an international audience and a very, very big audience. I think the future of MOOCs is probably going to be quite fragmented, because the M stands for massive, but massive is a very relative concept. How big is massive? We called our courses MOOCs, but we only ended up with about sort of at the most 600 students finishing our biggest MOOC, which is tiny compared to sort of Coursera or edX, who recruit in the tens of thousands and still finish with a few thousand at the end. And I do think there's probably going to be a big market for the not so massive MOOC. We were able to still use a lot of quite conventional online teaching pedagogy that we'd apply in our master's courses for like 20 or 30 students. On that scale of having 500 or 600, we didn't actually have to change the way we did things as much as you might think. But if they got much bigger, then a lot of the way we wanted to do things would have gone out the window. And it'll be interesting as we move one of our core sites MOOCs to future learn, how we have to rethink pedagogically how we can deliver it for that kind of much larger scale platform.
Okay, thank you.
The worrying thing for me was that 75% of people who enroll in those courses said that they did it because it was free, it didn't cost them anything. And I wondered whether that's an appropriate reason to actually sign on to a course. I signed on just to have a look. So this MOOC business was something that I was interested in, and I thought I might do a course, and then I gradually lost interest. Okay? It left me with the feeling that after doing quite a bit of research that MOOCs might be a taster, it might be something that we would try and develop as we move on. But it might be a course, it might be something that we develop perhaps into a whole programme, and maybe you can try and get a qualification. I lost that idea quite quickly as I was looking through the MIT stuff and realised that I had to attend 50% of some of the courses to get any qualification. I also realised that the dropout rates are quite high because of the difficulty in actually completing some of the MIT courses. Some of them aren't completable. For example, one of them had to have an exam where you had to attend. So how do you do that if you're an African and you're doing it online and all of a sudden you get to the end and it says 50% exam? How do I do that? Okay, survey by the Times Higher Education Supplement. 77% of academic leaders think online education is as good or better than face-to-face classes. Okay, now these are people who don't actually deal with classes at the moment. 69% say that it's essential to the long-term strategy, so they're not going to go away. We've got to learn to deal with them somehow. MOOCs involve no ongoing teaching expenses, don't they? Okay, very good. We'll look at that one too as we move through tonight, I suspect. They cost the same to run, no matter how many students enrol. And these are actual administrators who run our universities saying this. Okay, the content is free. Okay, I've delivered one partial MOOC, or it was a course that we were aiming to put into a MOOC in Africa, because I felt that it was something we could deliver and we could leave and the students would pick up. I spent an awful lot of time developing that programme, and at the end of it, what happened was it was actually put online. So what do I do this year? Okay, so my actual willingness as an academic to provide this kind of material is suddenly diminished. Okay? So those are the key underpinnings, and the bottom line is it seems to be cost is the key determinant, and an appreciation that we perhaps need to widen the availability of higher education throughout the world, but does it work? There are sticking points, okay? And these are things that I've come across, and I've just found one or two ideas to back them up. Getting an accreditable model. Okay, I find that when I start going into some depth, especially on the MIT and Stanford ones, the actual way of accreditation is not designed for online. It's literally course materials that have been put on as a repository. It's not there. You could not get half of the programmes with any sort of a qualification because it couldn't be accredited. That's a big issue. The other view is that students can support each other, so they don't need us, they don't need people who can go and talk these students through difficult problems. That's not quite the way we work, even online, and the Open University is probably a good example of this. 1 tutor to 25 students, okay? And the average ratio across all UK universities is 1 to 25. So we do need somebody to guide students through these courses. MOOCs solve the problem of expensive undergraduate education or educational scarcity in emerging economies. Now I work in 3 emerging economies. Okay, one of them is Vietnam, one of them is Malawi, and the other one is Zambia, and that's where the majority of our work is. Okay, they are actually better than your average UK students at participating because they have infrastructure difficulties, and all of a sudden Zamtel have a satellite. Okay, everybody's got a Zamtel dongle, and they can pick up course materials easier. Right, which means that if you're walking 10 miles to a weekend class or driving 500 miles to a weekend class, this is suddenly a lot more attractive. But the actual quality of the work that they do online is better than what I've seen from UK students too, so maybe some cultural aspects need to be considered there as well. Education is not a mass consumer industry. I had a look at the Liverpool University MBA because I thought there might be a job for me there somewhere. Okay, and when I looked at it, what I realised was this isn't an online course. It's called an online course. What happens is, as soon as I left my name, somebody contacted me, hi, I'm your personal advisor, I'll become your personal tutor. I said, well, where are you from? And they were from some franchise in America that actually ran the program for them. And they'll stay with me throughout my online course. So I've already got a personal advisor, but it's expensive if I can pay. Academic unwillingness to provide appropriate materials are going to be a problem as we move forward, and that's something that isn't just personal to me. You do need to look at the MIT stuff, and you'll find that there's an awful lot of stuff that's literally just cut away from normal courses and put on a repository. Okay, there's no reward structure for academics. Okay, once you've posted your stuff, what happens to you? Okay, what happens to image rights for academics on videos, and who updates this when you've gone? Okay, however, things work. Okay, and what works? Valuable for academic dissemination. Okay, it's brilliant to find out what's going on in other places. MOOCs are great as a shop window, and that's what we'll be using them for in Bolton. Our first posting on Future Learn will be this. It's interesting because Martin Bing, the Vice Chancellor at the Open University, said that really what we're doing on Future Learn is providing sample courses that will attract people to the Open University. MOOCs are going to be used as a pre-course filter. Okay? In Africa, we're going to let study skills for the MBA go online, and if people get the certificate in online learning and study skills, then they'll be deemed to be at a level where we can perhaps let them have a go at an online program without enrolling them manually, so they don't have to do the classes. MOOCs tie people to a university as well. You get used to people and a way of dealing with things, and one of the things we've concentrated on at Bolton is bringing a standard pattern of approach to learning, a standard pedagogical approach. Different cultural approaches may help, so we've talked about Africa, but also Vietnam, Malaysia, Australia, they have very strong underpinnings for online learning. The other thing that helps is where perhaps there's license fees paid for continuing use of your materials. Okay, so should you be getting 10p every time a student enrolls and uses your materials? It's probably the way forward, and for me, what universities are going to do with online degrees is put as much online as they can, but they'll still need you there to provide the online structure, the learning and the materials that keep that student up to date and knowledgeable.
Thank you. Dennis, thank you.
We've each got 7 minutes, which, as Simon cleverly knew, that's the median time that anybody watches a video on a MOOC. 7 minutes is about it, so you've already had 21. So well done. I want to start by just stating my thesis, which is something similar to what John said. I think education can only be a personal matter. It's a relationship between the tutor and the student. It can't be anything else. And here's a quote for you from Plutarch. Unfortunately, he wasn't available to do a podcast. But he said, when writing about Alexander, he says, I'm not writing history, but biography. And the most outstanding exploits do not always have the property of revealing the goodness or badness of an agent. Often it is, in fact, a casual action, the odd gesture, or a jest that reveals character better than battles involving the loss of thousands of men and thousands of lives. A gesture, a jest. Right? When you're working closely with the students, you get to know them really well. And I would argue you could never do that through Skype. There's a sort of gloss on it you possibly could. But you can't conceal, you can't really get to know them. Any good tutor knows you ask that certain question to your students, it changes their way of thinking, they respond. That doesn't happen on the online communities. But I'll come back to that at the end. The real interest in MOOCs for most university administrators, and I agree with Joe here, is where there's MOOCs, there's money. That's what they think, right? Where there's MOOCs, there's money. And MOOCs are a new phenomenon, as John suggested. 2002, MIT put the first courses online, and interestingly, that the Harvard and other top universities in America, the Ivy League, put their courses on in 2005. Guess what else happened in 2005, do you remember? YouTube. YouTube comes online. And Coursera is only founded in 2012. In that short period, between the founding of Coursera and last year, capital flowed into MOOCs in America, from $16 million to $65 million. And there weren't many MOOCs then, so money is there, and people see it as potentially profitable. And they attract students. If you look at Courserians, that's some Courserian students, this morning, and it keeps counting, it's like the Economist debt clock, it keeps ratcheting up as you're watching it. It was something over 6.5 million Courserians. So the idea of cost cutting for lecturers seems something that people could do. You'll have the rock stars. And by the way, I'm always doing, people ask me, I always do podcasts, so I've got all sorts of courses. So you can actually see me trying to get people to come along and do a course at the university. So you get the rock stars and then the adjuncts who are just doing the marking and things cheaply. So there's a certain interest for them. So you can see how universities right across the world think this is a great thing, let's get into it. For all the reasons I said, really cheap, put it all the podcasts, get rid of the duff lecturers, you can all watch the best people, and everything will be beautiful. It's interesting when you look at what people say who are critical of MOOCs. Some people see the introduction of MOOCs as a forerunner to revolution. This is a quote from a conference I was at where somebody spoke. Can we use technology and techniques to reappropriate, detonate, occupy global moments of space-time through a new pedagogy of space and time, which can be characterised as the production of critical knowledge in life? Right? It's scary when you meet these people. Right? So behind all the sensible things we've heard here, there's a lot of people engaged in theory. So they're trying to use technology. The other people who are critical of MOOCs are always my favourites. Diana Laureard says they're not creative enough. That's her basic criticism. They're not creative. It's too many talking heads. I like talking heads. They're my favourite things. Makes you focus on content. I don't want dancing little bits of animation. There's some dreadful podcasts. You can see Hannah Arendt as a cartoon. It's not worth watching. Feminists want alternatives that are non-judgmental, collaborative, and democratic MOOCs. So all these potentials, I don't want those, right? Because they don't want them because MOOCs are too authoritative. They believe that people are experts. They can tell you what you should know. Some of the best MOOCs do, of course. When you go to King's, they've got fantastic dental simulations that you can use, so they don't have to do operations on people's heads. But really great stuff. So that focus on MOOCs, I really like that. I mean, the people who are objecting to MOOCs are objecting to something that touches at the heart of the problem. Because what MOOCs are raising is the state of British and global higher education. And it's no wonder that people in developing countries are interested because they've still got a sense of education, which I don't think we have. And I think the parallel will probably be with Facebook rather than anything else about the future of MOOCs. There are 800 billion minutes spent on Facebook by people. Mostly posting pictures of what they had for dinner. Right? That gives you an example about how you do something with some technology. It doesn't mean it's going to be educational at all. And I think there are lots of issues you could discuss about the state of the new technology itself. But I think there are the problems with MOOCs. Everybody knows the pass rate is less than 2%. So there's 6 million people, only 2% of them are going to pass. That's basically the figures you get. Most of the people on these courses, and Sheffield have really got the market, everybody's got the market here, because most people have already got a degree. 70% of people have either got an undergraduate degree or a postgraduate degree who are doing these courses, anything that leads to a qualification. So the market is certainly that professional market. And while I'm doing promotion, Derby've got an excellent online course, the world leader in concrete studies. Right? So that's my little promo for that. I don't teach on it, I'll tell you that. So I think my real criticism about MOOCs and what they're interesting about, I'm interested in them, is they raise the issues about what higher education is about today. Because no doubt they can be successful. No doubt they can lead to qualifications. No doubt they can give you bits of information. No doubt they can get you through programs. And it may be easy if you're can't get near a university. But we do have a funny phenomenon on one of our MOOCs. People from the town centre, like 1.5 miles away, doing the online course rather than coming into university. But that's a strange phenomenon. But all the things we talk about with MOOCs show the state of higher education. And not just the administrators, I think the academics are in it too, where academics have gone along with new technology and games and playing and entertaining the students. Now suddenly find their jobs are threatened. Now let's put all our lectures online. Let's put everything available online. Then why bother having lectures? Why bother having lectures at all? And lecturers do that because they've forgotten what education is about as well. Education is an intense and long relationship with a tutor. Maybe you have a class with more than one person, it's not a one-to-one Oxbridge model, but nevertheless, each one of those has to relate to you individually. It's like being left with a novel. When you read one of Anthony Burgess's novels, as we're in the Anthony Burgess Foundation, you have a one-to-one relationship with Anthony Burgess. That's what happens. That's what happens in education. And we've lost the idea that that's what education is. We just think it's qualifications. And if you don't believe me, you should listen. Last year, Andreas Schleicher, who's the Deputy Director of OECD for Education and Skills, gave a talk at the London Education Conference promoted by Boris Johnson. And he said it was easier in the old days when you taught subjects because any doctor could teach them and people would pick up things. But now it's all about the dynamics of learning and skills. It's all about the dynamics of learning and skills. So you've got somebody who's from the OECD, right, a major international educational figure, saying we don't need education in the old sense of subjects. We need skills and we need dynamic learning. That's how bad the problem has got. And what has dropped out of it, is knowledge in any real sense, knowledge and understanding. Information you can get from MOOCs, but you can't get knowledge and understanding. That's my contention. You only get that in a relationship with a tutor. And you can't do that online in any way at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Can we just thank Well, I come out of this a wee bit confused. And I feel confused because there's a sense in which I still don't really know what a MOOC is. In the sense of, and I think you mentioned the word knowledge, that was the first time that knowledge had been mentioned the whole evening. And the conflation between knowledge and information. So I think where MOOCs actually fill up a market gap, it seems to me, as an online course, is very much in this professional, you said this, Joe, about professional development and professional, postgraduate, and people dipping in, as John, you've all talked about people dipping in. But this isn't the solid, substantial work of the university. So perhaps, you'd like to just tell me how is this really, how does it feature, how does it figure within the real work of the university? And is there a problem with packaging knowledge, with the credentialism that it seems to encourage? And what happens to the notion of scholarship in terms of lecturers who work in the university? I wonder if anyone would like to just respond to him on that before we go out to the audience. And is pick and mix okay?
Well, I think perhaps respond both at that point and to Dennis's ending point in terms of there seems to be the notion that online education just doesn't work. Because if you take a one-to-one relationship, and indeed scholarship, then that is very much there in terms of the Open University. It's there in terms of the model to which I operate, and it's there because we have obviously a large number of adult students who are in full-time occupations, and it's that combination of their experience in the workplace, I'm speaking of course from a business studies point of view, and the interaction with the tutor and the individual feedback from the tutor is extremely important, and that is safeguarding a scholarship and indeed knowledge in a sense. Let's look at that point.
I'd like to come in before I go up to the audience.
I kind of have to agree in that in terms of our distance learning master's programs that we run in Charlotte and the iSchool, my experience of working with students online has just been fantastic. I've got a dissertation student at the moment who I'm meeting via Skype. I'd rather it was Google Hangouts, but I think I'm splitting hairs there pedagogically. But my relationship with him just does not feel any different than any of the others that come to see me in my office. It doesn't feel like because Nandy's on the screen that there's some barrier there. It's working better than I thought it would. I didn't come into, it's the first person I've sort of supervised fully online. I didn't come into it thinking that it would be as easy and as good as it has been, but so far it has been great. It just feels the same. He's there in my office, he's just on the monitor and not on the chair next to the monitor. But apart from that, it just doesn't feel any different. We just talk in our normal way. He can send his work to me in advance. We can call up on the screen and look at it. It's just sort of normal.
But that's not the standard MOOCs experience, is it?
No, it's not the kind of experience that we can offer in a MOOC, but generally speaking, MOOCs aren't university modules or university degrees, mostly, yeah. I know they're teetering in that direction, more edX and so on are starting to offer chargeable ones, but then they tend to shift in terms of numbers and therefore often the pedagogy of them when they start to bring in the paying for side of things. I know some of the edX ones, there's limited numbers if you go down a paid for route, and you're kind of paying for that fact that you're not competing with 80,000 other people for your tutor's attention.
John uses words like feedback. Well, that's not a dialogue. It's not a platonic dialogue with your students. Feedback is something like, we slip into these phrases, but they tell us a lot. And when Claire says, it doesn't feel any different, well, perhaps you should offer your students more, because I do Skype and all those things. And to me, it's a pale imitation of that intense personal tutorial you can have, which could go on for hours sometimes, and you can really get to know people, and it goes on over a period. I do all this kind of things. And I think a lot of people do that because, you know, I was tempted by your FE, because in FE, people did this. I remember people giving tutorial tickets out for half an hour. And that's all you were going to get, half an hour. Quick tutorials, because that's all the time to have. So when you've lost the sense of the deepness of the dialogue that I think you need to get knowledge and understanding, then it's easy to say it seems just the same. And it probably is just the same, but that says something about the state of higher education.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head here. You've hit the crux of the problem, because is a MOOC dialogue online? Is it feedback online? Is it academic interaction online? For me, is it fostering creative and quality materials that people want to use? And I think the bit that we've missed out is that 18 and 21-year-olds are probably more online than we think. I know I've got a 12-year-old son who's never offline. He's got his Xbox and he lives in Xbox world at the moment. But when you actually introduce them to online, they tend to stop attending classes. And I think that this is where we hit the crux of the problem. We haven't properly defined what a MOOC is. So, I mean, actually trying to define where we go with something that we don't know what it is, you know, a difficult problem in itself. And I think that the real problem for me is the academic discourse probably does fall away a little bit when you've got more materials online. And as I saw MOOCs as a repository, the academic discourse would probably take place between students, with the tutor taking more of a observatory or monitoring format, and that's the model that we built at Bolton. But you know, again, we're very uncertain of the pedagogical implications of this model, and I think that this is where we are at the moment. We're seeming like we're floating in a variety of different bubbles trying to make a whole concept out of this, and I don't think we've quite got there yet.
All right, audience, what do you think? You take it, yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think you talk about the high dropout rates, and you've mentioned high dropout rates, and John, Joe, you said about sometimes there's a catch at the end that you might not know about at the start. I'd guess that the high dropout rate is probably more to do with the fact that they are free, and if something is free, it is literally worthless. You don't have to invest anything into it, so there's nothing to kind of keep you there. And the majority seem to be around workplace courses. I work in the civil service to try and get us on courses all the time. I haven't been on a course for about 12 years, but to get people on the North Centre, they are not worth doing. The majority, probably 99% of workplace courses, in the clerical sector anyway, are pointless and useless. But I did want to come back on Dennis's point, because I'm an alumni of the Open University. I didn't have and when I finished the OU, I then did a distance learning masters at Sheffield Hallam University. I didn't have a great deal of relationship with any of my tutors. But if you can have a relationship with Anthony Burgess through his books, which you can, why can't I simply have a relationship as I did with my tutors through the essays that I did? The OU I think is brilliant. It was brilliant. I loved it when I did it. But it's a very unbalanced thing intellectually in terms of people going along, because you get people like myself who kind of knew a lot before, then you get other people who are starting from scratch. So I'd go to the first classes to get to know the teacher, but then I generally wouldn't go after that because the classes weren't very useful to me. That 3 hours on a Saturday morning was better spent reading books and writing the essays, rather than having a relationship to a tutor. But you do develop a relationship through the essays because you get the feedback, you get good marks back, and tutors would write things that they'd enjoy reading your essays, and occasionally I'd bring them up to say, I've got a problem, I don't know how to approach this, very, very occasionally. But generally that relationship was developed, I think, through the essays. I didn't feel a need for those few classes that you have in an OU degree. An OU degree, a year lasts 9 months, you might have 7 or 8 classes over that time, 3 hours on a Saturday morning. If you're a self-motivated adult learner, I don't think you need to attend classes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a round of people. Thank you, Gazdula, behind the man.
Thank you.
And then the man.
It is one of the issues for the universities that the control of learning moves away from the universities and to the learners, and that the learners actually drop out of MOOCs, not because they're free and worthless, but because they're free and sometimes not satisfactory.
Okay, thank you. And then go in front and then lady. Yeah.
For me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think looking at this, we can look at it in the wider picture of it, as you touched upon. There's a degradation of academia, and one thing, and the authority that academia had, which it doesn't have anymore. And we talked about what's been mentioned about the students, are taking over the asylum, so to speak, and this will be so easy thing to do online. It'll be much easier, and it's not surprising that MOOCs have arisen actually, because the authority of the academic has been undercut that much. And in actual fact, it's hard to actually say that they're academics. They're just more like administrators than anything else. I remember we used to sort of like, when I was younger, we used to poo-poo the Open University because as Mickey Mouse things, because nobody would employ, I'm talking about when I was really young, well, nobody would employ someone on the basis of their academic qualification from the Open University. What got me about as I learned a few years later on, so actually people didn't go to Open University to get a job. They went on there for the joy of learning, for the wanting of learning. And I'm glad, John, that you don't have flares, a cheesecloth and love beads and long hair, sort of thing, like, which is what I always thought all Open University lecturers used to look like. But, like, when I'd stay up at night, I'd have on the Open University. The majority of the courses were not. There were some courses on metallurgy, for example, or something like that, which I probably pronounced wrong. But most of the courses were down to things like looking at poetry, looking at art in general, looking at history, philosophy, and the likes. And the people went on these courses simply because they wanted to learn that. And that learning thing has disappeared. And that actual joy and respect for actually education has gone. And I think it's a sign of the times, because it's not new. This happened in America after the Second World War, for example, where they came out with forces, basically, and went into universities. It was basically the same thing that we have seen over the past 20 years in this country, which goes on about we must get more people into the universities. Why? Why do we have to get some more people into universities? They're going to university and getting a higher education go back to the elite. They became the elite, not because they were born into it, they became the elite through passing exams, through being toughened up, to being trained in what education was. But today we just think, we just think, it's because they were born into it. Well, no, it wasn't because they were born into it.
Okay, and
yeah, I think, I agree with what you've been saying. I think it's a study skills issue as well, though, because if you go online to do a MOOC, you have to have a certain amount of study skills in order to succeed. And was it Joe said you have an online study skills MOOC in order to prepare people for the degree they're going to do. But if you're sitting at home and you want to study something and you haven't got those study skills, where do you get them from? And as well, I think if people drop out because of a lack of study skills, that could actually have quite a negative effect on their future study.
All right, I'll take one more and then we'll bring it all in and then we'll come out of it. Yes,
I just want to say £9,000 a year. That is what young people are facing today. And you might laugh at me, Dennis, but you talk about the pay limitation. But if the choice is between the pay limitation and no university education, then surely that is the debate that we're having now. And I think there's a certain inevitability that the options have closed. And we've talked about university administrators somewhat critically about the cost option, but are they facing the fact that we no longer receive any government funding? We no longer receive payments for students. It's on the students themselves, and if that is the only way in for people who otherwise would not be able to afford a higher education or don't have the safety net of being willing to say I will take that risk, then that to me is a bit of our public duty in providing a door that says give it a go in a low risk environment for you.
okay. Oh gosh, I'd like to come and really but I will say that you have to think about why it is that suddenly, actually over the last 10 or 15 years, it's become absolutely imperative for so many people to have a university education. And I think you need to perhaps ask that question. You know, is a university education as being the only route to success? And even then, we know there are an awful lot of graduates who are, you know, not in university level jobs. So perhaps it doesn't lie with the universities; it lies out there somewhere. And perhaps there are other reasons. So you know, do we want to buy into something cheaply or not that is second class? That was just thrown another one. Yeah. But panel, what would you like to respond to? Not in me, but to what's been said.
Well, I'm going to respond to your question, but never mind. No, I'd like to respond. I'm happy to what you've just thrown out anyway. Because, I mean, I think there is another model that's appearing, and I do entirely take points about the decline of authority of the lecture of the teacher, etc., I accept entirely. But we're also moving towards a situation where people are going to choose other routes, so they may go down, for example, apprenticeships, advanced apprenticeships, and therefore they will need some kind of supplement in terms of education. Now, whether you call that second class or first class education, I'm not sure that is entirely the point, because that is the kind of movements that we're seeing. That's the sort of work that I'm doing anyway with the Open University, and I can see that there's a lot of organisations and companies particularly are going to be seeking some extra education for the staff, and people will want to be developing their careers in that way. So I think there is a response there.
Okay, a couple of points. One is, I think one of the things that we've realised probably over this last year is that education's inelastic. If you put the price up, it's seen as a quality item. If you reduce the price, it's seen as something that's probably not worth doing. And I think there's a number of vice-chancellors probably ruined the first couple of years of tuition fees because they thought we'd have no students on our campus. Students who expected to rise another 6% on campus this year. So, you know, there's only one winner there, and Bolton are now charging full £9,000 because people will pay it. Research and study skills, and one of the things that sort of made me laugh a little bit inside was that the contradiction of our first MOOC probably now won't be titled study skills, because if they already have the study skills, why would we need to give them the study skills to get online? You know, this will be delivered to African students who need to be told to scroll down the screen. So, you know, this is something that I think we might need to go and have a look at. Low risk environment, was that Fran? Yeah, I thought that was brilliant, that, because I think that's one of the things that, the two things that stop people going into education is, one, they do not see a return on investment. So if your dad's a doctor, you'll spend £27,000 getting your first year, even if it takes forever to get through. It doesn't matter. okay, because you know that at the end of it you're going to get that back, okay, probably many times over. Okay, if you've got no experience of this, where do you start? And MOOCs is probably a great place to kick this off. One of the things that we mentioned about degrees was, is it the students that are at fault if people don't get jobs at graduate level, or is it the fact that there's too many degrees? Okay, the most enlightening moment that I've had probably for a couple of years in education was one of my African students at graduation. He'd done his MSc in project management. Okay, it's a hugely desirable thing in Africa. Okay, and he stood up at the end of it and he said, "Now I have got my degree, in the words of St John the Baptist, Malawi, please let us do what we have learned." And I thought that was so sad, because I thought, we've delivered a degree and he can't see the value of what his skills are in that society, where people like him are really, really important. And somewhere along the way, you know, we do have to have a look at perhaps where we do, you know, what we do and the way we do it ourselves.
I've got a bit of a problem with selling it cheap to Africa.
Well, we don't, that's the thing.
But you know,
We
anyway.
sell it a little bit cheaper, but
And perhaps,
not that
yeah,
cheap.
right, sorry. And can I just say, when I went to university, I didn't pay for my university degree. There were no fees. And we got a pretty good university education. Dennis?
Well, it's with trepidation I say this, but there's something peculiar about old university students. And, you know, you just have to be. There is something about them. They're very bright often, and obviously for all the reasons you've said. But it seems to me, and I've met many of them over the years, they don't quite have what I call the dialogic skills. They don't quite have the conversation skills in the same way as an ordinary student. It's just a fact, because they spend so little time doing it. Now, and it's the same with the MOOCs issue, though. I mean, it's wrong to blame MOOCs or the Open University, because what's happened to higher education, I should have said this, is it's been turned into a training programme. And the academics are to blame, because when we set about to build, all the programmes and MOOCs that everybody's running have learning objectives. And if you have objectives, it's a training programme, not an education programme. And if you did philosophy years ago, that's the first thing you learned. Education has no objectives, it's open-ended. It's about your understanding, you don't know where it's going to develop. If you go on a training programme, it has objectives, and every programme now has objectives. And that is, we haven't even flickered when that's happened. Right? Every university now has sets of objectives in mission statements. What do you need a mission statement at a university for? The pursuit of knowledge without fear and favour, that's what you're about, that's it. You don't need endless mission statements about sustainability or whatever is in there. So something has gone seriously wrong at the core of education. And because we got so used to it or totally blind to it, doesn't mean it isn't true. If you're teaching two objectives, you're on a training programme, not an educational programme, just fact. I think, and that brings you to the £9,000. That's the big swindle. They're paying all that money and not getting an education. What they do get is the student experience. There's more people now spending their time and efforts entertaining students than there is actually teaching them. 40% of all new employees in universities are not people with teaching experience, but managers of various sorts. The student experience army that exists. And what's that about? And the reason though, of course, there are no jobs. I should mention this to anybody who's a bit old-fashioned like me. There are no jobs. There used to be something called, the youth labour market problem. What do you do with all these 16-year-olds when there's no jobs for them, millions of them? Used to be people were frightened of revolution, and now they're all at university. And as we know, they stay there for years and years and years, and endless courses, whether they're MOOC courses or continuing courses, and people keep paying for them. One of the amazing things, I think all universities made this mistake. They thought there would be a reduction, say, in postgraduate courses. It's not happened. People are still paying for them. And that's because they've got no choice. What else would you do? It'd be nice if there was an alternative like Shirley's suggesting. What would you do? Stay at home and grow cannabis in a tunnel or something. That's about the only thing you can do. Well, have babies or something really socially useful. But people are wasting their time, and that's the real scandal. People are being paid that, and they're having the student experience and not getting a decent education. And you can see them walking around the university with those telephone directories of learning objectives, ticking them off. Right? And that's what they do. They don't say, did you get any understanding? They say, what mark did you get for that? Why isn't that learning objective marked? And they do that. They've learnt it. And then lecturers do exactly the same. When it gets to an exam board, everybody here has done it. This essay, this thesis, hasn't met learning objective 23. Right? So we got to mark it down.
All right, I'm going to stop you and bring Claire in.
Going back to the issue of study skills, I think, to be fair, there's skills in terms of ability to use technology, and there's study skills, and those two things are not identical. They might cross over a little bit. So I think you could certainly teach broader study skills using technology, and you could create a MOOC that taught study skills. I think we talked about it at Sheffield. But technology skills being taught by technology, yeah, that's probably a bit of a tricky thing. But I think the two are potentially separatable. I think you could deliver study skills as part of your MOOC. I can't remember who wrote it, but I read something very recently about the fact that MOOCs aren't delivering study skills and they're making assumptions that you know how to study, you'll be able to hit the ground running. And I think we tried to work around that with our MOOCs, and we tried to deliver some study skills elements, but I think we can certainly do that better. I thought it was interesting what you said about your experience of doing a distance learning course at Sheffield Hallam and not necessarily feeling like you missed out on something as part of your course just because you weren't having those kind of contacts with your sort of professors and so on and so forth. I think something that I found from delivering our online courses, not our MOOCs, but our master's programmes, is that there will always be students who really value the opportunity to have conversations with you, and we facilitate that because we have a synchronous lecturing kind of platform, so we can deliver a live lecture where the students and us are all together at the same time. We're looking at our computers, not each other across the lecture theatre. And we can use those environments for the students to ask questions like they might do in a lecture or like they would do in a seminar. Sometimes we use them for webinars. Maybe that will make words like that put people's backs up, but that's what we call an online seminar. And I really enjoy those elements of teaching on those programmes, the times when I do have contact with the students. MOOCs generally don't allow for that kind of contact, and they don't probably allow for the kind of learning that can go on between me as the teacher or tutor or lecturer and them as the students. The model that a lot of MOOCs are built around is this idea of peer learning, which I know a lot of people don't really buy or probably don't think is valuable, but then MOOCs are free, generally. But I do think there is also a lot of value in peer learning. I've seen this year on one of our master's programmes that element of it really, really flourishing. We've had one student who's been a real sort of catalyst for promoting meetups among the students online but outside of lectures, and seeing how that's really feeding back into their assessed work, and it is really valuable. So I think it's the peer learning model that can help to deliver the kind of learning or the levels of learning, if you're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy of learning, that we'll refer back to constantly these days. It's that within MOOCs that can deliver those sort of higher levels of learning that we associate with university level education, not just the handing over of factual information. But like I say, I appreciate that a lot of people don't sort of appreciate the value of peer learning, and certainly not peer marking, which I know happens on some MOOC courses.
Okay, Simon at the back.
So that a few people have mentioned that the good thing about MOOCs is that it's low risk and that you can dip into study or education without any particular consequences, really. And that I find incredibly worrying. When you talk about learning in a way that is incredibly safe, it just sounds very kind of babyfied in terms of education. And I'm sure that's not what you're saying, and I do take the point about getting a £9,000 a year bill for it, and the fact that you're paying £9,000 a year for something that's not worth it. But the opportunity of avoiding risk is really, really problematic. So for me, this academy that the Institute of Ideas is organising is a weekend retreat of scholarship where face-to-face you see some of the brightest minds that really challenge you intellectually. And that is one of the scariest weekends of my life, to go away for that. But I voluntarily go for it because I learn so much out of it. It's incredibly risky. Intellectually, I get squashed. But, you know, so what? There's a phenomenal learning experience that you go through with that. And I find the whole kind of avoid risk, dip in, dip out, just really devalues the thing that you can learn from having real pressure. Now, whether that's pay out the nose for a really expensive course and make sure that you get something out of it because you're paying for it, I mean, that's a bit consumerist in that sense, but there's surely got to be something very challenging about education and learning, and going down the low risk route just sounds wrong to me.
I've got a guy here and then the lady next door.
Very briefly, I never let my lectures or anything else interfere with my education, partially because I'm deaf. And this was actually, of course, a great advantage. And I wanted to say that the notion that the narrative that we're hearing about university education, we have bought into this great story of education. And we need to take it apart. Don't take it apart. Now, I'm talking about the narrative, not the education. We need to take it apart because there is an imperialism going on here of the insistence about universities, so that the people out there who are doing building work never think. Well, having worked with technicians, I can assure you there's a lot of hard thinking goes on behind technicians. And I think that we will have to be extremely clear about this, the notion of the difference between instruction and learning. Learning and instruction, instruction isn't learning, and you don't learn things simply by being told them, whether it's a lecture or not. And this is, of course, you see how the whole business builds up into a sort of institution. And then, of course, we then blame it. Now, Dennis was going on blaming this institution which has been constructed. It's to a large extent, it's part of people's imagination. It is a novel about it. It's a campus novel on the grander scale, you see. And of course, you remember the campus novels of the 60s, which were built around a sort of Marxist protest movement and so on. Actually, one thing that I did do was to run a protest movement which was very successful, and I learned a lot about being an agitator.
Okay, well, I'm very interested because our Only Learning course is a master's programme. It's actually training people to teach deaf children. We have international people. I think there's been a lot of confusion because we haven't really said what MOOCs are for. If a MOOC is actually to showcase the course that you're offering, and we're actually saying that we don't think it's appropriate to offer that worldwide to people who may not ever come, but may not have ever even got that on the map of that they need to have that in their country, then who are we to say we won't give them that education? I completely disagree that you can't have a good online relationship with the student, because I have done, and we've had very good, including international students and including students who are deaf. So I think we need to be clear about what are we talking about here. Are we talking about what Claire's talking about, which I think is what I am, or are we talking about having 60,000 people doing animal husbandry in somewhere or other, and with no accreditation? I think the idea of accreditation is very problematic, and I can understand that. But I think to throw the whole thing of MOOC out completely is ridiculous, because we live in a digital age and we have an obligation to ensure people have access to education.
Thank you, good point. Got that?
Yeah, I came here as agnostic about and ill-informed about MOOCs. I'm leaving disillusioned, not about MOOCs, but about what seems to me like a very private university discussion that involves £9,000 fees, and involves master's courses and involves undergraduate courses. And I suppose what I'm interested in is the fact that although 40% of our young people go onto higher education, 60% don't, 75% of adults don't have a higher education qualification. I've been really interested to see if MOOCs could engage adults, and we've lost millions of adults from adult education over the last few years. And I was interested to see whether there was an opportunity or a danger there, and I feel that it's just become a private discussion about the university world.
Okay.
Perhaps not surprising, it's sponsored by Bolton University, it's got 4 university people on the panel, but it's a private, separate world really to the rest of us.
Thank you. I think that's something that the panel certainly pick up on, but I'd like to take a couple more before we go back to the panel, and I will come up very quickly for the third time. Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think you should distinguish really between qualifications and education. And I think there's been a massive expansion in qualifications. Everybody goes to university, everybody's got a degree. You know, we widen participation so that we've included everybody and enable them to go on to university and get a degree. And in doing so, devalue that degree in effect. And the same thing happens in schools, GCSEs, higher rates of achievement and yet lower standard of education. People leaving school, they can't read or write, going on to university, and they've only got a very poor grasp of the basics. So we have devalued education by widening participation, and we are really talking about qualifications here with MOOCs and online courses, not education. I think Dennis is the only one who really has alluded to sort of classical education, where you've got the time to pursue ideas and discuss things. And, people laugh at that as if it's an elitist idea, but that's because they have lost that value in education, and really we need to get that back somehow. And I think another important point that Dennis made was the articulation of ideas. I mean, I sit here in these meetings and sometimes I think I understand something, but it's only when I try to actually discuss it or talk about it that I realise I don't really understand it at all. Or because I've listened to other people, my opinions have changed. And in articulating your ideas, you actually are demonstrating that understanding. When you're online, you switch off, you go away. But when you're actually in a physical university, that dialogue continues, so your education continues. Having said all that, I'm actually a supporter of using technology, and I worked for 7 years as an e-learning consultant myself, and I'm aware of the entertainment value in education. The last Labour government spent millions, billions in fact, on technology in schools, and that coincided with a period when educational standards declined. The technology isn't used to good effect in education. It doesn't add anything to the content of the courses necessarily. However, I do think that we do live in a digital age, as this previous lady said, and we would miss an opportunity if we don't actually utilise it in some ways. And there can be things like masterclasses and talking heads. Even, Michael Gove is talking about reintroducing the teacher talk into classes this week, much to the dismay of a lot of the teaching unions, because it's a traditional way of educating. So I think it's important that we don't lose sight of what education is in all of this. That really, we've been talking about qualifications for so many different things that I've sort of, lost in my own understanding what knowledge and education is these days. I'm confused about that.
More fully. And come back. I'll just take you and then I can come out again.
I'd just like to back up that remark that this being a bit of a private conversation between academics, and I just wonder what Burgess would have made of it. A man very expansive, could envisage the future, dystopian visions, some utopian visions. Is there anybody looking from the top down on all this and saying, what futures might we create here? Or what different futures? Because I think what is coming out of this is it's not just one big monolithic thing. I also work in Africa, and I see there's a market there quite different from the market in Derby or Bolton. I also do mentoring on Skype, and Skype's a brilliant way of getting close to somebody. Got to have the video, when you can see the ticks and what's happening, and he can see you, she can see you. These things are there, and it's going to change the industry you work in, you people, because you work in an industry, and all industries are being changed by technology. And I just wonder if it's all going to take all of you by surprise all of a sudden, because is there anybody, I ask the question again, who's looking down on all this? And an academic could do this really, really quite well, and say, well, yeah, it could work like this, it could work like that, and these are the distinctions that we'll be making in the future. Is anybody doing that?
Okay, right. We've got a few Gordons being thrown down there. Can you respond to just one thing each, rather than, because I think there's more people want to speak out in the audience. So, Claire, let's start with you.
I think what you just said about what the future might hold, and about academia is being transformed by technology, and that academia is an industry. I think to a certain extent that sort of chimes with my experience, because although I sort of come here from the university that's we've run 3 MOOCs in Shire, and we're going to run a few more in Future Learn, across the university as a whole, we're not a bunch of MOOC hugging type people, mostly doing stuff that we've been doing in Shire is unusual and different, and not the norm. And there's still a lot of a lot of people don't know what MOOCs are really about. They don't know whether they want to be involved in them. But again, it seems so tied to, in a lot of cases, I think, a bit of sort of hostility towards technology and what technology is doing to education. As someone who's sort of, for most of their career, sort of engaged with technology and quite like technology, I hope I'm not like that, and I can see the value. And from having done quite a lot of teaching online, but also learning online, I've done a couple of MOOCs down in other courses I pay for. I think I can come to it at least with a fairly sort of informed opinion. So many people I've spoken to, even at my own university, who sort of have quite strong opinions about MOOCs. If I ask them whether they've done one, they haven't. If I ask them if they've ever learned online, they haven't, but they've still got very strong opinions that they're a bad thing. And I think it would do a lot of people a lot of who sort of are resistant to the way technology is used in education, to go and find a MOOC about something you're interested in, whether or not that's related to the discipline area you work in, or it's just sort of fascinating to you, and have the experience of doing a MOOC and learning online. And hopefully, in many cases, you might have to sort of confront the reality that there's something actually quite good about it, and you might start to sort of embrace some of the positive aspects of the way that technology can be deployed in learning. Because like I say, I've had so many really, really great experiences of working with our online learners, and it's, I don't like to hear it or decry quite so much.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm an early adopter of technology, and I always have been. We started working with online programs in 2002 at the University, where I was an education lecturer. And one of the things that I realised very quickly is that there are a lot of dead ends in educational technology. But I hope I'm not sounding cynical on this, because I think that the other way of looking at this, the 1 or 2 strands that work brilliantly. And I think that's the bit that we're looking for at the moment in MOOCs. We're looking for the bits that work, because there's some that are going to fall off and not going to work. And that's the way it always has been with educational technology. It's an interesting point that you made about the study of education as an overarching academic pursuit, because it's only 2003, I think, that the first education studies programs actually started being accredited, and since then there has been a huge amount of observation of educational technologies and methodologies going on. My PhD's in that area, and I think it is being studied. But I think what we all tend to forget is that in 3 years the technology that you use, it isn't here yet, and we're trying to keep up with the technology that changes so fast, driven by people who probably aren't experts in our field, because you find very few really top quality educational technologists who are actually developing and inventing educational technologies. That tends to be the technology people, the technician who does that, that I think we are always going to be playing catch up until technology settles down, and I can't see any sign of that. So I hope we're not too cynical, but I think at the moment what we have to do is to be cynical enough to say that there are some things that we're going to explore that just don't work. But what we do need to do is pick up the things that work and work well and actually run with them and give them mileage. And some do. You know, you have to look at some of the virtual learning environments that there are around to know that if you find something that really works, that's something that you should be telling other people about because it's important.
Dennis.
I do hate the L word, learners. I'd rather talk about knowers than learners. And I think, you know, this issue about making things safe is really slightly a scary thing. But it's the whole thing about experience. The way people talk about my student experience and how we felt together and how you worked together, how marvellous it was. But sometimes you have to be really hard with students. Right, really, really hard with them. You can say that you are sometimes, but I just don't believe you, to be honest. I just think it's that nice touchy feeling, we're all getting on, it seems really nice, but you're not actually pushing them in the way you can. And the example I'll give you is from the Hannah Arendt film, where when she's writing her account of Eichmann's trials, she puts a Greek phrase in, and the editor says, can't you translate it? Because most of our readers can't speak Greek. And she says, they can learn. Right? I think, you know, that's what you should learn. And I don't think, for not 1 second, going to apologise for this debate because it's crucial to you, the people who think it's some sort of ivory tower debate, because what's happening in the ivory tower reflects on the rest of society. I'll take the Hannah Arendt position. You should listen to this debate because what's happening, as far as I'm concerned, is that knowledge and understanding is getting thrown out of education. And what's put in place is lots of processes. It's not surprising we can't define MOOCs. It'd be an impossible thing to do because nobody's really clear what it means. It means lots and lots of different things. What it does mean is messing about with something that isn't education. By and large, it isn't education. And I have done MOOCs, and I do like them sometimes. But mostly I want to strangle the people who are speaking. I want to get in the physical space and have a really good argument with them, and I can't. And I think that's where it gets to be an education. To be education, where you can have that sort of physical fight with the tutor, or an intellectual fight, obviously.
Yeah, that's interesting. Perhaps this is a response to that, but I'll just keep to one point, which really is about engagement. So I think there are 2 points, one over here and the gentleman at the back as well, both raised that, because I think that's what we also have to do, that we actually do have to take universities out there in some sense and engage with communities, and I guess the other point I would make also about the sort of low risk. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be low risk online. You can actually do things which are very high risk and extremely challenging to students. I do it in one of my courses because they have to do lots and lots of scary things, and I think that could apply to some MOOCs.
Okay, I'm going to come out again, and there's quite a few people want to speak. If you could just keep it really quite to the point and short, so that I can then bring the panel back in for 1 minute each to finish. So let's go out. Lady.
I think Joe touched on this slightly earlier when he mentioned about the cultural difference, and I think it comes back to something Dennis has just said about the intellectual sparring, or whatever you want to call it, with students. But that's very much a feature of a Socratic or a Western system. If you've any experience of teaching in the Far East, and like Joe, I've taught in Vietnam, Hong Kong, and so on, there it's a Confucian system where you are the teacher, you are all-knowing, I am the student, I am here for you to, I'm an empty vessel for you to fill up. And so I think how you do that, maybe MOOCs in terms of filling those empty vessels may be an appropriate method, but I do take your point about the intellectual sparring, which isn't really a feature of what happens in classrooms in the Far East.
Interesting point. David, back to me.
I'd just like to, just something I've observed really, I think that the discussion around MOOCs does link in very much with other issues in the broader culture. And I think that one of the interesting things for me about the whole MOOCs phenomenon is the way that it separates the learner from the teacher, the idea of distance. And I think that this is actually quite a sort of welcoming idea for us, because if we're afraid of intimacy, and often I think there's a lot of problems in the broader culture around intimacy between people. we feel very anxious about it. And certainly the idea of either exercising authority over another person or being in conflict, some sort of physical conflict with them in a battle around ideas, is actually quite, provokes a lot of anxiety. I know a lot of lecturers and teachers now leave their door open because they're actually rather nervous about having that very close, intimate, possibly conflicted or authoritarian relationship with the learner. And I wonder if MOOCs is kind of, this goes back to this question of minimising the risk, but if we can, that it feeds into a need to keep everything at a distance and to create a kind of technical barrier between people, and in that case it's dangerous.
I'm struck by the fact that Dennis has brought up Arendt a number of times, and I work on Arendt, and I recognise, I'm very sympathetic with what you're saying. I really recognise what you're saying about the need for a kind of intellectually sparring relationship. But the Arendt Centre at Bar College recently ran a big debate about MOOCs as well, and one of the things that seems important to me is that Arendt was kind of unashamedly elitist, and I'm not really an apologist for that. But it seems to me that we potentially make a false dichotomy in saying that something like the Academy, for instance, empowers, when in actual fact the logic behind it is the logic behind the New College for the Humanities, where you get contact time with academic superstars in return for £16,000 a year. It's the logic of the European Graduate School in Switzerland, where there's something similar going on. At the same time, I was struck by the comment that Joe made earlier on about what did you say? The franchise. The franchise is the work that power this new economy in MOOCs. And they're part of the same problem, because for all of those superstar academics, there's an absolute army of early careerists who are chronically underpaid, members of the academic precariat. And I say this as someone who's only very recently emerged from the bear pit of the current academic marketplace. So it seems to me that there's a kind of false dichotomy at the heart of the debate as it's being framed. In actual fact, it's an ongoing process of a stratification, which seems strange to say because Frank Furedi parades around as an anti-elitist, and actually I think he's incredibly elitist. And one of the things that it seems to me is lacking is a kind of a vision of a comprehensive higher education and the kinds of mechanisms of facilitating a development from a state school background or whatever into senses of higher learning. It seems to me that that's what we should be working on, and it's been missing.
And MOOCs could fill.
Well, I'm ambivalent about it. I think the thing is, again, it's that problem of I don't really know what we're talking about. It seems that the model that Claire's talking about is very, very different from the model that Harvard roll out, which it seems to me is just rampant and really quite cynical, sort of sniffing out the new market.
It's just a watch. I missed that with a motorbike.
Right.
Harvard model is just a watch.
It seems to me a rankly cynical money sniffing sort of operation rather than something
from which they have pulled back on. We're getting second goes now, and I can see two people who want to speak. Is there anyone who hasn't yet spoken? Yes, you, sir. Yes, your time.
Thank you. This feels a lot like 1994 in a way. If we cast our minds back, 94, a couple of decades, we find the internet quite small, tentative. Everybody's struggling to figure out how anybody's going to pay for anything, and in the meantime they're putting things out for free. And also it's quite elitist in terms of who was online back then, and none of the winners, the big players, the household names nowadays really existed. No Amazon, no Twitter, Google, all the people who are actually making serious money out of things now. And I'm just wondering whether if we were to reconvene 20 years from now, we might say, MOOCs, weren't we silly? We didn't realise that such and such a thing was already happening in some grassroots movement. And this idea that maybe somebody should be thinking top down, I actually wonder whether it will come around like Facebook and it will catch us all by surprise.
So should we be playing catch up in the universities? Right. Really, really quick.
A criticism of MOOCs is the high dropout rate. I mean, how does that compare with your individual institutions? What is the dropout rate in Open University, Shah, Bolton and Derby?
Okay.
Sorry, not a chance it's going to work. Just on the point that Dennis made about the importance of a personal relationship, I think the way that you articulated it, I think there's a danger of people misunderstanding what the nature of that personal relationship is, because you did say, you know, you can get to know the student, but the way I see it, it's the importance in challenging the authority of the lecturer. You're questioning the lecturer, and the student is capable of then asking the lecturer difficult questions, absorbing the knowledge of the lecturer, but challenging it. And if you look at everyone who's pushed forward knowledge and advanced knowledge, they've always had a close relationship with the people who've been their sort of close tutor. So if you look at Einstein, you know, Einstein had a close relationship with his tutor at was it Zurich or whatever university he was at. Purcell had a close relationship, etc. You know, Pierre Janet had a close relationship with Charcot. These people all push forward the boundaries of knowledge in their disciplines. And I think unless you can understand universities, the pushing forward of knowledge and the curiosity and the questioning, you can't really understand. This just seems to be a discussion about the form of distribution of the existing body of knowledge, which is a school. It's not a university.
Thank you. Finally, yes.
Well, I'd like to say again, well, not again, but for the it's rather differently. The Open University, which I was one of the people who was there on day one, the Open University is a heap of staff which is organised in a certain sort of way to help people get through this heap of stuff, and they are assisted occasionally by tutors to get through it. There is no real relationship. Of course you can make one, but there is no real this wonderful relationship between tutor and student and all of that sort of thing. By the time I went to Oxford 20 years before, I found that the atrophy of reading with your tutor had all disappeared. And you were dished out with the reading list, you were dished out with the topic, and you went away, and you had to try to find some way of getting through it. Now, of course, in sixth form, you've been taught some things, you'd invented some things, and you'd even had the benefit of Irwin. You remember in, yes, now that is, and he says that's the way to do it, and it's perfectly true. And you get that sort of thing. So I am extremely doubtful over many of the shibboleths which we have been sold about relationships and teachers and students and all the rest of the things. And I would remark that 18-year-olds should be grown up by now, and we should stop infantiling. I can't say it. Because look what happens on a Saturday night if you do that.
Okay, thank you. I am sort of being quite tight on the time because I'm conscious that Claire's got to go. So I would, before bringing the panel in, just say one more to reiterate what Simon was talking about the Academy. It is an unusual intellectual and scholarly experience that I think I still every year try my best to, and I've been to them all, try my best to rise to the occasion and very rarely do. But God, I do feel when I come away that I do know a lot more, and you know, it's very invigorating. So I would commend it to you, those of you who might be interested. Panel, last 1 minute each. The definitive last thing you want to say about MOOCs this evening, anyway. Claire.
I think what's been said about the risks around MOOC, I think we've talked about the risk from the learner's perspective in terms of their investment of sort of time and energy, and MOOCs are low risk in that sense. I think in terms of a teaching experience or a learning experience, I don't think they're low risk at all. When we developed our MOOCs, we put them out there for anybody who wants to come and do them, from any background, from any place, with any previous level of experience or none at all. And we're putting our ideas, our way of teaching, our content out there for all of those people to see and for them to talk about with their fellow students on that MOOC or wherever else they want to, on Facebook, on Twitter. I think it takes a lot of nerve, and there's a huge amount of risk potentially in putting on a MOOC, and I think it takes actually quite a lot of nerve to be willing to be involved in one and putting yourself on a much kind of higher pedestal in a way, or a much kind of bigger platform. I don't think they're a low risk enterprise at all, but that's a lot of where the sort of excitement of doing comes from as well.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to revert now, just in case you need to go. Please don't, I'm not trying to push you out. I just wanted you to have your last say at any rate. Yes, please.
Okay, well, I think MOOCs are not going to go away. I think that's the first thing to do. So whatever the debates that have gone on and whatever the ideas that have been put forward and the values that have been espoused, they're here to stay. So we're going to have to contend with them in some way or other, and we will find a lot of things that won't work. There's a lot of aspects of technology that don't work. We will find, as Joe was saying, bits that do, and that's, I think, the really interesting thing about MOOCs eventually. So, I mean, to me, it's just a big experimentation. Yeah, it's got all the defects that we've explored and displayed this evening. I do think there will be a movement forward, and that there will be an exploration of the different segmentations of population that are appropriate, and that will actually move universities forward in some ways.
Okay, I think Joe, you spoke to that, didn't you? Do you want to speak to that now?
I now have to find something different to say because that was
Okay.
My feeling
sure
is...
Thank you.
Sorry. My feeling is that all online learning, all e-learning is an expensive enhancement to learning and isn't learning in itself in the beginning. I think we're in MOOCs because we dare not be in them. We've got to be in them because we don't really know what they are, and if we're not exploring them, we have an academic duty to do that, and if we're not exploring them, we won't find these key strands that actually do provide fantastic learning experiences, whether it's for people here in Africa, for people with particular disabilities or particular subject areas. I think that the exploration of these massive online courses is something that we'll return to again and again, and I think that probably the pressing academic need is to find a good, clear definition of what these things are. I spent 8 years trying to define what enterprise learning was, and I still didn't really come to a conclusion, but I narrowed it down a little bit. And I think that this is something that we need to do with this, and I think the starting point for us as academics is to get out there, get writing, and start trying to put some definitions together so that we've got a real understanding of what these massive online courses are, because we need to find the things that are excellent in them and develop people accordingly.
Thank you.
Just going to make 2 points. One about lifestyle and one about students. And too often we look at new technology from the point of view of consumption, right? The way we use it, emails, Facebook. Right? If Facebook was a country, it would be the most unproductive one on earth. Right? And you have to look at it, and if we were back in '94, people were saying the hype, 40% of corporate expenditure in America was on new technology, and productivity went down. Right? There's serious lessons from business to be learnt about new technology, and in fact the speed of technology is slowing, not increasing. So technological change is slowing down, and it's very, very slow compared with the past. So you have to be really cautious about looking at it. From the fact you get 20 million emails a day, which is obviously an advance, we could have stopped that for 30 years ago, I'd been pleased. That's one thing. On the students, you can't take things out of the historical period. In the 1960s, Tyrrell Burgess at East London used to run an independent studies programme where the students designed their own course. But the course was full of knowledge. Every course they designed was stuff full of knowledge, because that was the time. So when people had that relationship with their tutors then, it was a knowledge-based relationship. You know, now it's a therapeutic relationship you have with students. And I have to say, one thing I try and get my students to do is stop questioning. Because they're taught to say, I don't agree with Plato. You know, what? You can't even spell his name. Right? That's a basic issue. They don't read. Right? You know, if there was an innovation that would really transform universities, I agree with you here, would be reading. Read, 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 and read. Because reading is that one situation where it's just you and the book, mind to mind. Right? That's a unique situation you can hardly get anywhere else now. So if you want a real advance, I would suggest that. And just as an example, what the student experience, peer learning. When I was at university, I always say this, what we did as peer learning, it wasn't we didn't stroke one and say, how are you getting on with that course? And, you know, how do you think about this and how are you going to write that essay? We sat in the Jolly Sailor pub in Canterbury, night after night, and read through Hegel, Kant, Marx, everything, line by line. Right? So I know that I read it, line by line, we discussed every line. So what were we doing as students? Right? We had the great minds in that room with us. Right? That was then the student experience. Right? We were a Bible reading group, okay, it's fine, but that stands you in great stead. Would students do that today? No, they would not. And that is the real difference. So you can't generalise over the periods, and I think we've got to get back to a period where if you leave students alone, because Newman said this, if you leave them alone, they'll educate themselves. Right? But they won't now. It's not that time. We don't value knowledge in the same way. And I think that's the message I would like to get out of MOOCs, even if I twist the story of MOOCs to get that message in.
Okay, thank you. Can we thank our panel?